Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about world affairs and the people who shape it. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch, and in this show we discuss topical global issues and have in-depth conversations with personalities in foreign policy. Global Dispatches is presented in partnership with Humanity in Action, an international educational organization, and I am a Humanity in Action Senior Fellow. My guest today, Paul Stares, is the author of the new book, Preventative Engagement: How America Can Avoid War, Stay Strong, and Keep the Peace. The book identifies what Stares calls the, quote, American predicament, in which the United States remains the principal guarantor of global peace and security, but in the process of maintaining global peace and security, the United States becomes overly extended and prone to costly military entanglements. Stares offers a way out of this predicament that does not involve retreating from the world, but rather embraces what he calls preventative engagement. We discuss what this concept entails and why even the Trump administration might be willing to implement it. This is a good, high-minded conversation about U.S. foreign policy and about the value of the United Nations and multilateral engagement to U.S. national security interests. I'll post a link to the book on the podcast homepage. And before we begin, a big thank you to everyone who has been emailing me with suggestions of people I should interview or topics I should cover. I know I say this often, but it's true. I do this for you. And by you, I mean literally like you who are listening to me in your earphones right now. I put this together for you. So if there is something that you would want me to cover or want me to explore more deeper for this podcast, please email me. You can use the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com. I really do love hearing from you and love engaging with you and everyone out there who listens to the show. I love hearing from you. And now here is my conversation with Paul Stares, who is the General John W. Vesey Senior Fellow for Conflict Prevention and Director of the Center for Preventive Action at the Council on Foreign Relations.
So over the last 70 years, America has become the principal guarantor of global peace and security. And in that role, it has assumed a whole variety of commitments and obligations to defend other states around the world from external aggression, to support the UN and ensure that it is the principal global institution for managing international peace and security, to ensuring access to the global commons, the vital shipping arteries out of space, the airways, and more recently also underwriting a commitment to preventing mass atrocities and other gross violations of human rights. And collectively, this provides a huge set of commitments and obligations, which ultimately, given America's role, is underwritten by its military strength and its willingness to use its military power to ensure compliance with these general commitments and obligations, and which are vital for global order, often called the international liberal order. And the problem is, of course, is that at any one time, the U.S. can be pulled or demanded or asked to fulfill these commitments, and potentially at considerable cost to the United States in both blood and treasure. And so there's a real risk that, particularly as the world becomes more disorderly or the world in disarray, as it's sometimes called, that the U.S.
I think that was your boss's book.
That's right. And
yeah.
the U.S. will be increasingly called upon to use military force to uphold the global order, and at great cost to itself. And
well, what's a recent example of that dynamic?
Well, we felt obliged to punish Syria for the use of chemical weapons recently, to uphold the multilateral treaty banning chemical weapons in the world and prohibiting their use. we felt obliged to.
Well, I should say, but of course, in the course of doing that, the U.S. also violated one longstanding principle of the liberal international order, which is that these kinds of actions can only be conferred by the Security Council.
That is true, and people have pointed out that there are there's some real contradictions here. We did do it in a multilateral way, in the sense that the United Kingdom and France were part of the operation, so it wasn't purely unilateral in that sense. But you're right; it does raise troubling questions about our willingness to cast aside these ironclad principles of international order, namely preservation of national sovereignty. I can give another example: the intervention in Libya, supposedly to prevent the Gaddafi regime from carrying out mass atrocities. That was another case in point. And then there are more sort of national security-oriented missions that we've done, from dealing with the threat of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and the potential use of on transference of weapons of mass destruction by Iraq in 2003. So there have been plenty of cases where we felt compelled to intervene and carry out what have become quite expensive military operations as a consequence. And there's many more on the horizon where we could conceivably also be pressured to intervene.
Could you maybe not make the case that the implicit understanding behind, the American predicament is that, yes, the U.S. is the guarantor of the liberal international order, but is also the greatest beneficiary of the order?
That is true. This is not purely a self-interested or enlightened self-interested motive. We clearly benefit greatly from the openness of the world economy that we help protect in terms of securing the waterways and for international commerce. Yes, we clearly have benefited probably the most from this, but it hasn't been constructed in a purely very narrow fashion. It's very much to the benefit of many others too, which I think is generally recognized around the world.
So, is the challenge, as I take it, with the American predicament, is that the U.S. military is being called upon more and more often to do more and more things in more and more places, and that is ultimately unsustainable?
That's true. And, we are a rich country. We have the most powerful armed forces in the world, and if these demands are relatively limited and sporadic, then we can sustain that. The risk is that we are moving toward a much more competitive, more adversarial relationship with Russia and China, as well as some major regional powers, Iran, North Korea, that both either have nuclear weapons or have the potential of developing nuclear weapons. And that's a whole different ballgame in terms of managing the threat of conflict. And the risks are much greater. And I worry, and this is really the reason why I wrote the book, was that I fear that we could stumble into a major conflict with both Russia or China, and as a consequence of that, the cost of even just maintaining a very sort of adversarial posture, a kind of new Cold War 2.0, as it's sometimes called, even that would be extremely costly to America and drain it of resources that are better spent, frankly, elsewhere. And that over time that could erode America's prominence in the world, its ability to be this, as I say, this last resort for maintaining international order. And who knows what would replace it and replace America as the principal guarantor? Is it China? Is it some combination of China and Russia? I'm not sure many people would look upon that prospect with a great deal of hope.
And one way to avoid that scenario is to undertake what you call preventative engagement. Can you describe what you mean by that term?
Yeah, so the usual responses to this predicament is either to build up our military forces, do more, or to cut back and do less, and to be a more restrained and calibrated in our role in the world. And I characterize those two options as supply side strategies. They're really about what level of U.S. power should America maintain and project around the world. And both, in my view, have real limitations. They can be costly. They could kind of create security vacuums that could be exploited by others, and lead to a more disorderly world. So instead, I propose what I call a demand-side approach, which is a strategy to reduce the overall demand for U.S. power in the future by a concerted effort to look ahead, to try to shape the future in ways that lessen the risk of us being drawn into costly conflicts. And the approach that I advocate is very much informed by the approach that we take toward other major public policy challenges, whether it's violent crime, illicit drug use, infectious diseases. And it's essentially a sort of multi-tiered preventive strategy in which you initially try to reduce the risk factors associated with the problem, that you then try to look ahead and anticipate the most threatening challenges that could, if they occur, could overwhelm your ability to manage them, and simultaneously also try to manage ongoing threats too. So it's a three-level strategy with a long-term effort involving addressing these sort of looming challenges over the horizon, a midterm game in which we try to anticipate the most likely and the most dangerous places we could be drawn into conflict, particularly involving another major power like China or Russia or Iran, which could be extremely costly. And then dealing with ongoing issues, whether it's Ukraine, North Korea, Afghanistan, and Syria, obviously, where the situation could clearly get worse and also drag us in even further than we are at the moment. So overall, it's a sort of a concerted, multi-tiered, multi-dimensional strategy to deal with the long-term, mid-term, and short-term.
Can you walk me through some examples of where elements of this strategy have been effectively deployed?
There are many elements where that we have pursued in the past, which I think can be pursued in the future, which have had a demonstrable effect on improving international stability and promoting global order. One is reaching a general modus vivendi with the major powers about the importance of maintaining an equitable nuclear deterrence, the effective nuclear deterrence of each of the major powers, promoting the viability of our worldwide regional alliance systems, which have been very beneficial for maintaining regional security, preventing the outbreak of major arms races around the world. This has, I think, been very important for global security. Promoting international development and democracy around the world also has had a demonstrable effect in lessening civil conflict. And trade, too, is another important factor to promoting long-term peace and stability, because as countries become more interdependent economically, they too are less likely to fight one another. So there are some obvious sort of long-term strategies that we should continue to pursue to maintain long-term stability.
Well,
We've also, had some very successful diplomatic initiatives too, whether it's lessening the likelihood of conflict at the end of the Cold War and with the unification of Germany. More recently, in preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and in earlier years from preventing North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. There have been many cases where enlightened diplomacy by the U.S. has helped prevent a conflict from escalating and from bringing existing conflicts to an end too, whether it's in the Balkans, in East Timor, in parts of Africa. We've been very good at that, but we don't do it on a very systematic, concerted, regular fashion. We tend to do it sporadically, and what I argue in the book is that we need to just increase the resources and the effort and the priority we give to those diplomatic efforts, because we just don't do enough of that.
Well, can I ask, to what extent is your prescription different than just calling for more liberal internationalism and increasing resources available to American diplomacy vis-a-vis the Defense Department? Just sort of more properly reallocating resources to the Department of State.
That is clearly part of it, but the problem that we consistently face is that we are very short-sighted in the way we look ahead and try to anticipate potential problems. We tend to be very reactive, with the result that when crises emerge, we are very improvised in the way we manage them. Sometimes they work, other times they don't. I think the situation in Syria is a case in point where we wrung our hands for many years about what to do, and the situation just got worse. And what I think differentiates what I advocate and just putting diplomacy on steroids, or pumping up our international foreign assistance and exhorting more allies to do more, is this more forward-looking, forward-shaping effort to try to anticipate areas of instability and conflict before they become serious problems, and do much more in terms of trying to shape the future rather than being hostage to it. And that's, I think, the real key difference from just, more diplomacy, more foreign aid, better partnerships. It's a much more coherent, concerted effort.
I'm wondering, how does the United Nations fit into this formulation? Because, it does seem that this concept that you outline has been an early priority of Antonio Guterres when he was kind of running for the position of Secretary General. He said, conflict prevention was his top goal. Right. And, there's they have some sort of mediation abilities, but it seems that, the UN is still sort of reacting to crises around the world as opposed to taking that kind of proactive step. Partly, I think it's a matter of resources. They are not a over-resourced institution. And so I'm sort of wondering how you see the United Nations fitting into this concept that you've outlined.
Well, let me make a sort of general comment. Firstly, this preventive engagement agenda that I lay out is not something the U.S. can do alone or should do alone. This is something where many countries around the world, the international community in general, can really benefit from doing. So this isn't purely an agenda that serves just U.S. national interests, although it does have real benefits for that. As a result, I emphasize the importance of the UN to this overall strategy. The UN is really the indispensable institution when it comes to setting global norms and rules of behavior. The UN Charter is obviously a vital document to guide international behavior. And we should do everything possible to ensure that the UN stays a viable, effective organization. You're right. The UN, however, has largely been reactive to events. In some respects, it's more hostage to events than the U.S., since it's very difficult structurally for the UN to be more proactive. Secretary General Guterres has made prevention a priority. I think he came in and saying he had three priorities: prevention, prevention, and prevention. And he's just recently unveiled an overhaul of the UN machinery to make the UN more proactive, to consolidate its operations, to have more coherence to its approach to peace building, to foreign assistance, and mediation efforts. Mm-hmm. And while it doesn't get a lot of credit for what it does, it really has been effective in tamping down many conflicts around the world. And it's one of the sort of paradoxes of preventive action is that success is essentially never heralded, because what you feared never happens as a result of your actions. And UN diplomats have proved time and time again how effective they can be in many of these little conflicts and places we barely can point to on the map, and yet they've been very effective there. And frankly, with limited resources.
Can you maybe point to an example of one of those like unheralded successes of prevention?
Yes, there's been cases, particularly in West Africa, where certain territorial disputes, border demarcations have been quietly dealt with by the UN. There have been various sort of mediation efforts in several West African countries too, where it looked like tensions were rising. And of course, the UN is probably most well known for its peacekeeping forces, which tend to be seen as sort of band-aids to conflict. In many respects they are, but they have also proven to be very effective in preventing the resurgence of conflict. States that have experienced civil conflict are most at risk of slipping back, and the presence of UN forces in numerous places, particularly in Africa, I think has prevented conflict from flaring up again. And again, the UN doesn't always get the credit for that. For doing that.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire.
Absolutely.
Those.
Yeah, these are all good cases, definitely. And so the UN provides the overarching kind of normative political framework to facilitate world order, but also is doing things operationally too to advance peace on the ground, and it doesn't always get the credit for it, unfortunately.
I guess finally, how does your concept of preventive engagement mesh with what we are seeing in terms of the Trump administration's foreign policy priorities? I mean, superficially, at least, it does not seem as if the Trump administration is receptive to these kinds of ideas, but I'm wondering if perhaps below the surface there might be elements of these of preventive engagement that the U.S. is pursuing nonetheless.
Yeah, you're right in thinking that this seems closer to the approach that the Obama administration would have pursued, or the Clinton, the Hillary Clinton presidency, if it happened, would have pursued. But when you pass the comments and statements of the president, it's clear that he doesn't want us to get involved in major power conflict. He wants us to get out of places where we have expended a huge amounts of national wealth, to say nothing of suffering many casualties. And he doesn't want us to get drawn into other conflicts. And so those are frankly all at the bottom or core objectives of preventive engagement. So at that level, it actually is very close to pursuing or achieving the very objectives that he really wants. And so, it's something that he should feel that this is a formula that I think could really satisfy what he's trying to achieve in the world.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. This was helpful, and I'll post a link to the book on the website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Paul. That was good. Like I said, a good high-minded conversation about the U.S. role in the world. Always good to take a step back and have these kinds of big picture conversations. And before I let you go, if you are a premium subscriber and you have not accessed the bonus episodes or are having trouble accessing the bonus episodes, just let me know. You can hit me up on the email. And if you're a premium subscriber and you've not unlocked all the rewards that you are entitled to, please just email me. I'll make sure that you can get access to Dawn's Digest, the Global News Clip service, and the list of social media handles to follow, and other goodies that I include as part of my enticements to have you become a premium subscriber. So just send me an email. You can use the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com, or if you're a premium subscriber, you probably already have my personal email. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.
The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of Humanity in Action.